I always believed that trust was the foundation of any relationship, but as I sit here, heart pounding with a mix of betrayal and disbelief, I realize that sometimes the very thing you cling to can be weaponized against you. I was engaged to Michael, a charming, confident man with a smile that could light up any room, and yet from the beginning, my own deep-seated insecurities had cast a long shadow over our time together. I had always struggled with trust issues, a vulnerability that stemmed from years of feeling abandoned and hurt by those who were supposed to love me unconditionally. Instead of offering comfort when I expressed my fears, Michael often ridiculed them, dismissing my concerns as the quirks of an overactive imagination. At first, I chalked it up to his misplaced confidence, his way of saying he didn't need to coddle my emotions. But as our wedding plans began to take shape and our lives grew more intertwined, the mockery became a recurring theme, a constant reminder that even as I yearned for validation, he saw my vulnerability as a weakness to be exploited. I remember one cool autumn evening, sitting on the back porch of our small apartment as the fading light cast long shadows across the worn wooden steps. I had been recounting a particularly painful memory from my childhood, a time when I felt utterly forsaken by those I loved, and Michael had laughed, shaking his head in disbelief. "You really believe that people are out to get you, don't you?" he said with a smirk, as if my experiences were nothing more than an amusing anecdote rather than the raw truth of my existence. His laughter stung, not because I was expecting empathy from him, but because it underscored the gulf between my internal reality and his casual dismissal of my feelings. I sat there silently, my thoughts a tangle of sorrow and anger, wondering if I was destined to be alone with my doubts, forever branded as someone unworthy of trust. Even as I questioned the validity of my own suspicions, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Michael's confidence masked something darker. He had a way of deflecting my questions with a charm that was almost hypnotic, leaving me to doubt my own perceptions. Friends would tell me that I was overthinking, that Michael was simply teasing me in the way many couples do, but the deep-seated hurt I carried told a different story. I started keeping a journal, scribbling down every unsettling detail, the times he brushed off my concerns, the furtive glances he'd cast when my eyes were not on him, the lingering presence of someone in the background whenever we were together. The journal became my refuge, a silent witness to the gradual erosion of my hope. As the months passed, the fissures in our relationship deepened. I tried to push aside the uneasy feeling, convincing myself that love meant accepting the imperfections of the person you chose to spend your life with. Yet, every time I voiced a concern, Michael's response was laced with a casual arrogance. "You worry too much," he'd say, a dismissive tone coloring his words, as if my very capacity to feel was a flaw. His friends, too, seemed to echo this sentiment, their laughter and knowing looks suggesting that my trust issues were not only common but almost laughable. I began to wonder if my vulnerability was a curse, an inherent part of who I was that rendered me incapable of experiencing a relationship built on mutual respect. Then, life threw me a curveball that would shatter the fragile balance of my reality. It was a week before our engagement party, a celebration that was meant to be the joyful culmination of months of planning and hope. I had spent countless hours perfecting every detail, determined to make it a night of pure happiness and unity. The venue was decorated with soft, warm lights and delicate floral arrangements, each element chosen with care to evoke a sense of intimacy and celebration. Family members, old friends, and even a few colleagues filled the space, all eagerly anticipating the future I had once believed in so fervently. Yet, beneath the surface of that seemingly perfect evening, dark currents of betrayal were already swirling, waiting to upend everything. I was busy mingling with guests when a sudden commotion near the entrance caught my attention. I noticed a group of people gathered around a large screen set up in a quiet corner of the room, a screen that, until that moment, had served as a simple backdrop for decorative purposes. A chill ran down my spine as I edged closer, curiosity warring with a foreboding sense of dread. On the screen, live footage was being broadcast, a scene that was both surreal and horrifying. There, in real time, was Michael, seemingly unaware of the camera, locked in a passionate embrace with someone I never expected to see. My heart pounded in my ears as I strained to make out the features of the woman by his side. As the image came into sharper focus, my breath caught in my throat. It was my sister, Elena. The shock of that moment was indescribable. I felt as if the floor had dropped out from beneath me, leaving me suspended in a nightmare I could neither wake from nor escape. Michael's smirk, which had so often belittled my emotions, was now twisted into a grotesque parody of confidence as he continued his indiscretion. The live stream, captured by a hidden camera that had somehow been set up during the event, was broadcasting their betrayal for all to see. The room, once filled with the hum of celebration and the soft murmur of laughter, fell into an eerie silence punctuated by gasps and murmurs of disbelief. Time seemed to slow as I tried to process the enormity of the revelation. Elena, my beloved sister, the person I had always looked up to as a beacon of strength and integrity, was entwined with the very man I had trusted with my future. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound I had ever experienced, not just because of the romantic deceit but because of the multifaceted treachery it represented. Michael, who had once mocked my trust issues, had now become the architect of my deepest pain, and Elena, whose loyalty I had never questioned, was now the unwitting accomplice in a drama that defied all my expectations. In the ensuing chaos, I could see the disbelief mirrored on the faces of our guests. Some tried to approach me, offering murmurs of sympathy, but their words felt hollow in the face of such a profound betrayal. I retreated to a quiet corner of the venue, where I could be alone with my racing thoughts. The noise of the crowd became a distant hum as I grappled with the torrent of emotions crashing over me: anger, sorrow, humiliation, and a piercing sense of isolation. The very foundations of my world were crumbling, and I was left to pick up the pieces of a shattered illusion. As I sat there, trembling and disoriented, fragments of memories flooded back. I recalled the nights when I had agonized over Michael's dismissive laughter, the moments when I had silently questioned his every word. I remembered the subtle signs I had overlooked, convinced that my trust issues were nothing more than an overreaction. Now, every small doubt, every whispered insecurity, converged into a single, excruciating reality. The man I had loved and believed in had betrayed me in the most public and painful way imaginable, and my own flesh and blood had become entangled in that deception. The shock of the live-streamed affair left me paralyzed for a long moment, as if time itself had paused to bear witness to my devastation. I could see the screen clearly, their faces, the unguarded intimacy, and the obliviousness with which Michael carried on as though nothing were amiss. It was a cruel irony that the very trait he had mocked in me, my propensity to see betrayal where others saw nothing, was now vindicated in the most brutal fashion. The laughter, the dismissive comments, the patronizing reassurances that had once made me feel small now echoed in my mind with a sinister clarity. In the midst of that overwhelming pain, I felt a strange sense of clarity emerge. The shock slowly gave way to a simmering resolve, a determination to reclaim control over a life that had been hijacked by deceit and humiliation. I knew that the journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, that the path to healing would be long and uncertain, but in that moment of utter devastation, I made a silent promise to myself: I would not allow their betrayal to define me. I would dig deep, unearth the strength I had always possessed but had been too afraid to acknowledge, and I would rise above the chaos of shattered trust. As the live stream continued to play, I felt the eyes of the crowd on me, a mixture of pity, shock, and something else I couldn't quite decipher. I realized that I was now at the epicenter of a spectacle, an unwitting participant in a drama that extended far beyond my personal pain. Every whispered conversation, every furtive glance exchanged among the guests, seemed to underscore the magnitude of the betrayal. And yet, amid the humiliation and the tears that threatened to spill over, there was a nascent spark of defiance. I knew that the coming days would force me to confront not only the treachery of those I once held dear but also the demons that had long haunted my fragile heart. In the hours that followed, I found myself wandering aimlessly through the quiet, deserted streets outside the venue. The cool night air, crisp and unyielding, was a stark contrast to the chaos I had just witnessed. I walked without direction, my mind a whirlwind of memories, regrets, and an emerging determination to redefine my own narrative. Every step was an act of rebellion, a refusal to let the betrayal of Michael and Elena dictate the course of my life. I thought of the times I had hidden my true self, of the moments I had allowed fear and insecurity to rule my decisions. Now, I knew that true healing would require more than just the passage of time. It would demand an honest reckoning with the painful truths that had been thrust upon me. I recalled the long, solitary nights spent poring over my journal, where I had dared to write down every fear, every doubt that had plagued me. Those pages, filled with raw emotion and quiet desperation, had always been a secret sanctuary. Now, as I walked the empty streets beneath the indifferent glow of streetlights, I realized that it was time to reclaim that sanctuary, to confront the demons of my past and to forge a path forward, no matter how steep or treacherous it might be. The images of Michael's smug expression and Elena's reluctant intimacy were burned into my memory, a constant reminder of how fragile trust could be. Yet, amid the wreckage, I also felt an unexpected clarity, a determination to seek out the truth behind the facade. I began to wonder about the forces that had driven them to commit such a betrayal. Was it merely a moment of weakness, a lapse in judgment fueled by fleeting desire? Or was there something deeper, a web of secrets and resentments that had been allowed to fester beneath the surface, poisoning everything in its path? The questions swirled in my mind like autumn leaves caught in a relentless wind, and I knew that the answers would not come easily. As dawn approached, the first pale light of morning began to chase away the shadows of the night. I found myself standing at a crossroads, both literal and metaphorical, with the path ahead shrouded in uncertainty. The betrayal had stripped away the illusions I had clung to for so long, leaving me bare and exposed before a world that now seemed indifferent to my pain. But in that raw vulnerability, I sensed the seeds of a new beginning, a chance to rebuild not just my shattered trust, but the very foundation of my identity. I resolved to confront Michael, to demand answers that I had been denied for far too long. The thought of facing him again filled me with a turbulent mix of dread and determination. I knew that the confrontation would force me to relive every moment of humiliation, every sting of rejection, yet I also recognized that it was a necessary step in reclaiming my power. I would no longer allow myself to be defined by his mocking laughter or the deceitful actions that had upended my life. In the quiet moments before the sun fully rose, I began planning how I might piece together the fragments of a life that now felt irreparably broken. I thought of the conversations I had avoided, the truths I had buried deep within my soul, and I resolved that each day from that moment forward would be a step toward healing. I would confront the painful memories, learn from them, and eventually, I hoped, find a way to forgive, not for their sake, but for my own. As the new day broke, painting the sky with streaks of pink and gold, I felt an inner resolve solidify. I would seek out the truth behind the betrayal, however painful that truth might be. I would not allow Michael's dismissive mockery or Elena's complicity to continue defining my worth. I would rebuild my life on my own terms, guided by the lessons of my past and the strength I was only just beginning to recognize within myself. Even as I steeled myself for the inevitable confrontation and the long, arduous journey of recovery that lay ahead, I could not shake the lingering echo of that fateful night, the live stream that had exposed their betrayal to the world. It was a moment that would forever be etched into my memory, a turning point that would dictate the course of my future. And as I took that first tentative step into the uncertain light of a new day, I carried with me both the deep scars of betrayal and the fragile promise of renewal, knowing that while the road ahead might be littered with remnants of the past, it also held the possibility of a future built on the unyielding strength of a heart that had learned to trust again. I woke up the next morning with a numbness that seemed to seep into every part of my being, a lingering residue of the shock from last night's horror. The image of the live stream, Michael and Elena locked in their forbidden embrace, their betrayal splashed across a screen for everyone to see, haunted my every thought. As dawn broke, the soft light of morning did little to ease the dark despair that had taken root within me. I spent hours in bed, replaying that moment in my mind, questioning every earlier conversation, every dismissive laugh Michael had ever thrown my way. It wasn't simply that he had mocked my trust issues, it was the complete and utter violation of everything I had believed about our future, about my sister's integrity, and about my own worth. I finally forced myself to rise, my legs heavy as I moved through the silent, empty corridors of our apartment. Every step was an act of defiance against the raw vulnerability that threatened to consume me. I knew I couldn't bury the pain forever, nor could I allow Michael's callous behavior to define me. I began scribbling in my journal with a fervor that surprised even me, the ink flowing as I tried to articulate the swirling emotions, anger, hurt, disbelief, and a desperate need for clarity. I wrote about every moment that had led to this day, questioning how I had missed the signs and wondering if, in some twisted way, I had been complicit in my own undoing by trusting him so blindly. The events of the previous night had thrown my family into chaos. At our engagement party, the shock on every face was palpable, and I could feel the weight of judgment from relatives whose eyes darted away from mine. I sensed pity and whispered condemnation swirling around me, as if the scandal had become a spectacle too grand to ignore. Overwhelmed by the humiliation, I had slipped away from the party, seeking refuge on the deserted streets under the indifferent glow of streetlights. Now, as I sat at my kitchen table with a lukewarm cup of coffee, I felt the cold clarity of morning urging me to confront the situation head-on. Determined to reclaim some control over my life, I resolved to meet with those who could provide insight or solace. First, my sister Elena. I had always admired her strength and kindness, and I struggled to reconcile the image I had of her with the betrayal that had unfolded so publicly. I arranged to meet her at a quiet cafe downtown, a place where soft music and the low hum of conversation might help cushion the blow of the impending confrontation. The walk there was a blur of conflicted thoughts, memories of childhood laughter shared with her, the warm embrace we had exchanged in better times, now juxtaposed with the bitter reality of her secret involvement with Michael. When I finally saw her, seated alone at a corner table with trembling hands wrapped around a steaming mug of tea, my heart pounded with a mix of apprehension and sorrow. Her eyes, red from crying and filled with a remorse that cut deeper than any harsh word, met mine with a silent plea for understanding. I sat down, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was heavy with unspoken questions and regrets. I finally broke the stillness, my voice barely above a whisper. "Elena, I need to understand. How did this happen? How could we let it come to this?" Her voice trembled as she spoke, laden with guilt and regret. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said, her eyes glistening with tears. "I made a terrible mistake, and I was so lost in my own confusion that I couldn't see the consequences. I'm so sorry for betraying you, for betraying our family." The words felt inadequate, a mere whisper in the face of the monumental betrayal that had shattered the very foundation of my trust. As she tried to explain herself, I could see the conflict in her eyes, regret intermingled with a desperate desire to justify her actions, as though she were pleading with herself even as much as with me. In that painful conversation, I realized that the betrayal was not as black and white as I had once assumed. Elena spoke of loneliness and vulnerability, of moments when she felt invisible within the family's rigid hierarchy, and of how Michael's attention had seemed to offer an escape from a life that had long felt stifling. Still, the hurt was undeniable. I felt the sting of betrayal as not only a personal affront but as a dismantling of the idealized picture I had held of my family, a picture where loyalty and unconditional love were sacrosanct. Even as I listened, I could feel my heart hardening with a resolve I hadn't known I possessed. I told her, voice quivering yet firm, that trust was not something that could be rebuilt with words alone, and that I needed time to process the pain, to see if I could ever understand the depths of her mistake. Leaving the cafe, I wandered the city streets, my mind a turbulent ocean of emotion. The cold air did little to numb the burning ache of betrayal. I recalled all the times Michael had mocked my insecurities, dismissing my fears as irrational, as weaknesses that needed to be overcome. Now, those same insecurities, once the subject of his ridicule, had been validated in the most excruciating manner possible. The irony was not lost on me, and it stoked the embers of anger that burned within. I thought about the countless nights spent doubting my own worth, of feeling isolated in a world that seemed to value superficial charm over the honest admission of vulnerability. That night, I had been forced to confront a brutal reality. The man I had chosen to spend my life with had betrayed me in front of an audience, and worse, he had done so by involving someone who had once been my closest confidant. I knew that a confrontation with Michael was inevitable. The thought of facing him again filled me with a potent mix of dread and determination. I needed answers: why he had continued to mock my concerns when all I ever wanted was reassurance, why he had allowed his infidelity to spiral into something so public and devastating, and most of all, why he had chosen to betray me in such a callous, hurtful way. That afternoon, I found myself outside his apartment building, standing in the dim light as I debated whether I was ready to step inside and demand the truth. The decision to confront him was not one I took lightly. It was a crucible in which I hoped to forge some semblance of closure, or at the very least, to force him to acknowledge the pain he had inflicted. Inside his apartment, the air was heavy with a mix of stale regret and lingering defiance. I found Michael in the living room, his posture relaxed as if he were completely unaware of the storm he had unleashed. When he saw me, his expression flickered with surprise and something that I couldn't quite name, perhaps guilt, or maybe even a trace of fear. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said casually, almost too casually, as though the events of the previous night were a trivial inconvenience. My voice, though trembling, was resolute as I demanded, "Explain yourself, Michael. Why did you mock my trust issues when you clearly knew how much they hurt me? And how could you let it come to this? How could you betray me, and involve Elena, in such a public, humiliating way?" For a long moment, he said nothing, his eyes darting away as if unable to meet the weight of my gaze. Finally, he spoke in a tone that was low and hesitant. I'm sorry," he began, the words stumbling out as if he were unsure how to form an apology for something so monstrous. "I thought I was being playful, that you'd understand it was just a joke. I never imagined it would escalate like this." His words, however, rang hollow, a feeble attempt at justification that did nothing to erase the vivid image of his betrayal on that screen. The raw edge of my anger rose as I pressed him further, demanding to know if he even cared about the consequences of his actions, if the humiliation I was feeling was nothing more than collateral damage in his pursuit of self-indulgence. The confrontation grew heated, the conversation teetering on the brink of a full-blown argument as he shifted from feigned remorse to defensive evasion. I recalled every instance of his dismissive laughter, every moment when he had made light of my insecurities, and each memory fueled the fire of my indignation. As he attempted to deflect blame and minimize the gravity of his actions, I realized that the man I once loved had become a stranger, a person unrecognizable in his callous disregard for the sanctity of trust and the bonds of family. In that charged moment, I felt an unexpected clarity. I recognized that I had spent so long tolerating his behavior, excusing his cruelty as a quirk of personality, that I had lost sight of my own self-worth. The confrontation, as painful as it was, became a turning point, a moment when I resolved to no longer allow his shallow dismissals and betrayals to define me. After what felt like an eternity of bitter words and stifled tears, I left his apartment with a heavy heart and a resolve that began to crystallize with each step away from the man who had once promised me forever. Outside, the city was alive with the murmur of early traffic and the muted buzz of everyday life, an indifferent backdrop to my personal catastrophe. I found solace in the anonymity of the bustling streets, blending into the crowd as I sought to gather the fragments of my dignity and piece together a future that did not depend on the validation of someone so callous. The days that followed were a blur of introspection and cautious reconnection with those who still cared. I sought out the quiet counsel of a close friend, a person who had always known the hidden depths of my struggles with trust and who had never flinched in the face of my vulnerabilities. Over long walks in the park and countless hours spent talking in hushed tones over coffee, I began to rebuild the shattered pieces of my identity. I started to understand that the betrayal I had endured was not a reflection of my worth, but a failure of someone else to honor the sanctity of our bond. Slowly, I began to see that the wounds inflicted by Michael's actions, though deep, could eventually be healed by the strength I had long suppressed. Throughout this tumultuous period, I continued writing in my journal, a silent witness to the evolution of my inner world. The pages became a repository for the storm of emotions that surged within me, the searing pain of betrayal, the bitter taste of humiliation, and, over time, the tentative buds of resilience that began to take root. I poured out my fears, my anger, and even my moments of despair, allowing the act of writing to serve as both an exorcism of past traumas and a blueprint for a future built on self-respect. In those solitary moments, I discovered that my vulnerability was not a weakness to be mocked, but a source of unparalleled strength, a reminder that the capacity to feel deeply was also the capacity to heal, to grow, and to eventually trust again. Even as I sought healing, the scandal continued to ripple outward, leaving its mark on every facet of my life. Friends, colleagues, and even acquaintances who had once admired the couple we had envisioned began to distance themselves, leaving me feeling more isolated than ever. Social media buzzed with commentary, and I could sense the judgment of a world that had been captivated by the drama of it all. The hurtful comments and disparaging memes were constant reminders that my personal pain had been transformed into a public spectacle. Yet, amid the cacophony of digital noise, I began to find strength in the realization that my story was mine alone, untouchable by the transient opinions of those who had never walked in my shoes. A turning point came when I attended a support group for individuals who had experienced profound betrayal. In that circle of strangers, I saw reflected my own pain and resilience. As each person shared their story of shattered trust and subsequent healing, I felt a kinship that transcended the isolation I had long felt. In the honest confessions of others, I discovered that the journey toward rebuilding trust was a shared human experience, a universal struggle that bound us together, even in our most solitary moments. Their words, their scars, and their hard-won victories lit a path for me to follow, a path toward reclaiming the power that had been stripped away by the actions of those who had betrayed me. With time, the initial shock gave way to a determination to forge a future defined not by the mistakes of the past, but by the promise of renewal. I began setting boundaries, not just with Michael, but with every relationship that threatened to diminish my sense of self. I learned to say no to those who would belittle my emotions, to demand respect for the trust one had once so readily given. In the quiet of my apartment, amidst the soft hum of a city that continued its indifferent march, I vowed that I would not be defined by the cruelty of another's actions. I would reclaim my narrative, piece by painful piece, and in doing so, I would find the strength to love myself again. The process was neither swift nor linear. There were days when the sting of betrayal felt fresh, when the echoes of Michael's laughter and the image of Elena's regretful eyes returned unbidden. Yet, with each passing day, I noticed small signs of healing, a genuine smile emerging despite the pain, a moment of laughter shared with a friend, the steady rhythm of life resuming its course. Each small victory was a testament to the resilience that had lain dormant within me, waiting for the moment to rise again. In the midst of this personal transformation, I began to question what it meant to truly trust. I realized that trust was not a given, it was something to be earned, nurtured, and guarded. I embarked on a journey of self-discovery that led me to confront the origins of my deep-seated insecurities, the long-buried memories of past betrayals that had sown the seeds of doubt in my heart. Therapy sessions, quiet moments of introspection, and countless hours spent reflecting in my journal helped me understand that while the pain of betrayal might never fully disappear, it could be transformed into a source of wisdom and strength. And so, as I stand now at the threshold of a new chapter in my life, I carry with me the scars of betrayal as badges of survival. The path ahead is uncertain, and the memory of that fateful live stream will forever be a part of me, but I refuse to let it dictate my future. I have learned that the most profound transformations arise from the deepest wounds, and that true healing comes not from the absence of pain, but from the courage to embrace it, learn from it, and ultimately, rise above it. In the weeks that followed my confrontation with Michael, I began to see the world with a clarity that I had never known before, a recognition that the opinions of others, the fleeting judgments cast in social media feeds or whispered behind closed doors, held no power over my intrinsic worth. I was no longer a victim defined by betrayal, I was a survivor, a woman who had faced the darkest of nights and emerged with a fierce determination to rebuild her life on her own terms. As I continue my journey, I remain committed to honoring my own truth, to cultivating relationships that are built on mutual respect and genuine care. The memory of that painful night serves as a constant reminder that trust, once broken, can be mended, but only if we are willing to confront the past honestly, embrace our vulnerabilities, and allow ourselves the grace to heal. And in that healing, I have found not only redemption but also the promise of a future where my heart, though scarred, beats with the steady rhythm of hope and resilience. I left Michael's apartment that day feeling as if I were stepping out of a collapsing world into a stormy unknown. The bitter taste of betrayal still clung to my lips, and every step I took away from his cold, empty living room felt both liberating and agonizing. Outside, the city was beginning to stir awake under a heavy, leaden sky, and as I walked along rain-slicked sidewalks, my mind churned with thoughts of revenge, forgiveness, and the desperate need to reclaim my identity. I could no longer see myself as the fragile, insecure woman who had allowed her trust issues to be mocked. I was determined to rise from this wreckage, piece by painful piece. In the days that followed, I found myself oscillating between the extremes of despair and a flicker of rebellious hope. Every moment was punctuated by memories of the live stream, the image of Michael's smug expression and the undeniable sight of Elena, my sister, caught in a moment of indiscretion that shattered every illusion I had built around our family and our future together. It was as if the universe had conspired to strip away the comfortable lies I had lived by, forcing me to confront a truth I had long feared. That trust, once betrayed so publicly, was nearly impossible to restore. I spent many sleepless nights wandering the city, the neon reflections in puddles mingling with the tears I could no longer hold back. In the solitude of those dark hours, I revisited every conversation, every subtle hint I had dismissed as my own paranoia. I began to see patterns where I once saw only isolated incidents, a mocking tone in his laughter, the way his eyes darted when I spoke of my fears. I understood now that my insecurities had been not just a vulnerability but also a warning sign I had chosen to ignore. The irony stung bitterly. The very trait he had ridiculed was, in truth, a necessary part of who I was, a shield against the inevitable pain of misplaced trust. Determined to find some semblance of clarity, I reached out to a friend who had always been a steady, grounding presence in my life. We met at a small, late-night diner where the hum of fluorescent lights and the clatter of dishes provided a strange sort of comfort. I poured out my story to her in a torrent of raw emotion, about Michael's relentless dismissal of my fears, about the haunting live stream that had exposed the darkest betrayal, and about the gut-wrenching realization that my own flesh and blood had played a part in this tragedy. She listened quietly, her eyes full of empathy, and when I finally fell silent, she said, "You deserve better than someone who makes a joke out of your pain. And you deserve the truth, even if it hurts more than you ever imagined." Those words, simple yet profound, sparked within me the first glimmer of resolve to reclaim control over my life. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions as I navigated a treacherous path between confronting the past and planning for a future I was not sure I could ever trust again. I knew I needed answers, and the only way to get them was to confront Michael directly. With every ounce of trembling courage, I scheduled a meeting with him in a neutral, nondescript cafe. I arrived early, my hands clammy and my heart pounding in anticipation. Every minute felt like an eternity as I sat at a small table in the corner, rehearsing the questions in my mind, questions that demanded accountability and honesty. When Michael finally arrived, he looked as if he were trying to shrink into himself, his usual confident posture replaced by a subdued, almost apologetic slump. I could see the conflict in his eyes, a flicker of something I hadn't noticed before, guilt, perhaps, or the dawning realization of the magnitude of his actions. I began slowly, my voice wavering as I asked him to explain the events of that night, to justify the live stream that had left me exposed and humiliated. For a long while, he offered only vague apologies, his words stumbling over each other as if he were trying desperately to construct a narrative that might absolve him of responsibility. But the more he spoke, the clearer it became that his explanations were nothing more than self-serving rationalizations. "Did you ever care about what I felt?" I demanded, my voice rising with each word. "Or was it all just a game to you, a way to boost your ego while dismissing my fears?" His silence in response was damning enough. I pressed further, recounting specific instances when his laughter had cut deeper than any insult, when his casual dismissal had made me feel invisible and unworthy. With each revelation, the facade of the man I once loved crumbled further, revealing not a partner, but a stranger who had used my vulnerabilities as ammunition against me. The conversation spiraled into bitter accusations and shattered hopes. At one point, Michael's voice cracked as he tried to explain that he had believed I was overreacting, that my trust issues were merely an exaggerated response to everyday insecurities. "I thought I was helping you by showing you that you needed to let go of that constant fear," he said in a tone that was as cold as it was regretful. But his words fell on deaf ears. I realized then that his attempts to rationalize his behavior were nothing but an echo of the very mockery he had once directed at me. The weight of his betrayal was too immense to be mitigated by simple apologies. I left the cafe that day feeling more adrift than ever, the conversation with Michael leaving me with a deep, gnawing emptiness. Yet, in that emptiness, there was also a burgeoning determination to rebuild my sense of self. I knew that I could not allow his mockery or his betrayal to continue defining who I was. I needed to reclaim my power, my worth, and my ability to trust in my own judgment. That evening, back in the solitude of my apartment, I began a new journal entry, one that was not about the pain, but about the steps I would take to heal and grow. I wrote about setting boundaries, about learning to honor my own feelings, and about the importance of surrounding myself with people who valued authenticity over superficial charm. As the days turned into weeks, I immersed myself in a journey of self-discovery and healing. I sought therapy to help me untangle the complex web of emotions that Michael's betrayal had woven around my heart. In those sessions, I learned that my trust issues were not a weakness to be ridiculed, but a natural response to years of emotional neglect and hurt. My therapist encouraged me to view my vulnerability as a strength, a sign of my capacity to feel deeply and to love fiercely. With each session, I began to understand that my worth was not contingent upon someone else's validation. I learned to see the beauty in my sensitivity, to recognize that the very trait that had once been a source of ridicule was now becoming the cornerstone of my personal growth. Meanwhile, the scandal continued to ripple through the fabric of my family and social circles. Friends who had once admired the couple I had envisioned began to distance themselves, and social media became a battleground of gossip and harsh judgments. I watched as fleeting comments and cruel memes were posted, turning my personal pain into a spectacle for public consumption. There were moments when the humiliation was almost unbearable, when I longed to retreat into complete isolation. Yet, I also found unexpected strength in the solidarity of others who had experienced similar betrayals. I joined an online community for people recovering from infidelity, a safe haven where stories of heartbreak were met with empathy and support. In that community, I discovered that I was not alone in my struggle. Others had faced the sting of betrayal and emerged stronger, their scars a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. One night, during a particularly raw support group session, a stranger's voice broke through the collective sorrow. She spoke of how she had been ridiculed for her own vulnerabilities, how the very people who were supposed to love her had dismissed her pain as a flaw. Her story resonated with me on a level I hadn't anticipated, and for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. I realized that while the wound was deep, it was not insurmountable. I began to see that my journey toward healing was not about erasing the past but about integrating it into a new narrative, one where I could acknowledge my hurt while also celebrating my capacity for growth. Slowly, I began to rebuild my life. I started taking small steps to reclaim the parts of myself that had been overshadowed by Michael's betrayal. I reconnected with old friends, attended gatherings where laughter and genuine connection replaced the sting of gossip, and even allowed myself moments of joy without the constant shadow of suspicion. I pursued hobbies that had once brought me solace, painting, writing poetry, and even taking long walks in nature, where the rhythm of the earth helped soothe the chaos in my mind. Each small victory was a declaration of my independence, a reminder that my worth was defined not by the actions of another, but by my own courage to rise after falling. One crisp afternoon, as I sat by a tranquil lake watching the autumn leaves drift lazily on the water's surface, I felt an overwhelming sense of clarity. The betrayal that had once threatened to consume me now appeared as a painful yet transformative chapter in the story of my life. I realized that I had the power to transform this deep wound into a source of strength and insight. I made a vow to myself: I would never again allow the mockery of my vulnerabilities, or the callous actions of those who betrayed me, to dictate the course of my life. I would embrace my trust issues as part of my complex, beautiful identity and use them to guide me toward relationships built on mutual respect and genuine understanding. In time, the memories of that fateful live stream began to lose their sharp edges, morphing from an unyielding source of pain into a scar that reminded me of how far I had come. I even started sharing my story, cautiously, at first, with others who were struggling with similar betrayals. Whether through anonymous blog posts or intimate conversations in support groups, I found that articulating my experience not only helped me heal but also provided solace to those who felt as isolated as I once did. In sharing my truth, I reclaimed the narrative that had been stolen from me, transforming it into a testament to resilience, growth, and the unyielding power of self-love. As I write these words now, with the gentle hum of life returning to normalcy around me, I am aware that the scars of betrayal will remain etched into my soul. They serve as enduring reminders of a time when my trust was shattered and my world was turned upside down. But those scars are not marks of defeat, they are emblems of survival, of a woman who refused to be defined by the cruelty of others. I have learned that true strength is not the absence of pain, but the ability to confront it head-on, to learn from it, and to emerge with a deeper understanding of who I am. Looking ahead, I know the journey toward healing is ongoing, a path with twists and turns that may sometimes lead me back to moments of vulnerability. Yet, armed with the wisdom born of heartbreak, I step forward with cautious optimism. I have rebuilt my life on a foundation of authenticity and self-respect, and while I may remain wary of those who would exploit my vulnerabilities, I now recognize that these very vulnerabilities make me uniquely human. They connect me to a community of souls who, despite the bruises of life, continue to hope, love, and believe in the possibility of renewal. In this new chapter, I have learned to trust, not blindly, but with a guarded openness that honors my past while embracing the promise of the future. I have set boundaries that protect my heart, and I have cultivated relationships where empathy, honesty, and mutual respect are cherished above superficial charm. Michael's betrayal, as excruciating as it was, forced me to confront the painful reality of my own insecurities and ultimately freed me from the chains of someone else's mockery. I no longer allow his dismissive laughter to echo in my mind, for I know that my worth is not defined by his inability to understand my pain. Today, as I walk down a busy street under a clear, forgiving sky, I feel a quiet resolve stirring within me. The past remains a part of who I am, but it no longer holds the power to dictate my future. I have chosen to embrace the complexities of my life, the trust issues, the betrayals, the moments of deep, soul-wrenching pain, because they have all contributed to the person I have become. I am stronger, more compassionate, and more aware of my own value than ever before. Every step forward is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a quiet defiance against a world that often demands perfection at the cost of authenticity. In reclaiming my narrative, I have not only found a path to healing but also discovered the transformative power of self-acceptance. And so, with each new sunrise, I continue to rebuild my life, one honest, courageous step at a time, knowing that the scars of yesterday will always serve as the foundation for the strength of tomorrow.